Hey, it's Alex. This is a bit of a pre-video recording that I'm adding after the fact. In about a minute, you get to see me do the whole, hey, it's Alex from BoardGameCo and all that. But I'm just letting you know that if you stick around to the end of this video, there's actually going to be an interview I did regarding Dungeon Universalis. Basically, I reached out to Thomas. Thomas is someone who I mentioned in the video you're about to see. He's someone who's a collaborator on the project, as well as he's put together a lot of information. He is both a huge fan of dungeon crawlers in general, having, well, somewhere in the range of 100 dungeon crawlers in his collection, with none being amongst his top 5 dungeon crawlers. And so I specifically decided to do this video, this interview, because Dungeon Universalis, in contrast with many of the games I cover, simultaneously has a huge following, and yet no content creators are really covering it. And I know is not a fair statement. There are content creators who have covered it, but none of the usual Kickstarter stuff that you'll see when a Kickstarter comes out. I know the Dungeon Dive covered it. There are a few other content creators as well who I'm not familiar offhand, but I want to bring a little bit more to the table to cover, well, why is Dungeon Universalis potentially a game for you? What about it is driving that 9.2 rating on BoardGameGeek? And so I basically have an interview at the end, timestamps down below of course, where I talk to Thomas and go through his dungeon crawlers, his top 5 favorites, who Dun is for, who Dun is not for, and basically go into Dun a bit more. And hopefully you find that helpful, and if not, well, I apologize, I don't really know. Anyways, in about a minute, or but 4 seconds, you'll see me do the whole hey it's Alex thing, so enjoy that. Hey, I'm Alex from BoardGameCo, and today we're going to be talking about Dungeon Universalis. And the problem with pushing off a video again and again and saying you're going to do a dedicated video again and then not covering it in the roundup is it starts setting this expectation of some amazing magical video, which this totally will not be. It won't. I've been swamped, frankly, and, well, sometimes I have to push things off, and probably should just push them off and just leave it alone and not overly talk about it. In any case, Dungeon Universalis, the second printing of Dungeon, well, Universalis, currently with 2940 backers, $499,000 raised, probably $500,000 by the time you watch this video, 12 days to go by the time you watch this video, and a whole lot to cover here, and it's not that much. I mean, there's a lot to go through. Let's go through the game. What is the game? What's the story with the last game? What's the story with the upgrade packs, the pledge levels? Should you back it? All that kind of stuff. And to start with, this game is currently a 9.2 on BoardGameGeek. A 9.2 with 403 ratings, which is not a small number. Now, to be frank, I went through, I don't know why I said to be frank, that has no context here. For whatever reason, I went through every single one of those roughly 70 people who rated it a 10. I clicked on every single one of those profiles to see which of those profiles rated only this game a 10, because whenever you have 403 ratings is a decent amount, don't get me wrong, but it's still a small enough sample size that I'm always curious how many of those people are just, you know, friends, people who got encouraged to rate the game. Nothing against that. I have no problem with the practice. I just like to know what the real rating is. And most of those 70 ratings, most of those 70 10s, are people who have rated multiple other games, and not just multiple other games 10s, but rather are real people, I mean, I guess they're all real people, who have rated other games and given them other ratings that you can, well, evaluate. So most of those 10s seem to be completely legit, which means this 9.2 really does seem to be an outpouring of love from people who love this game. I'm sure there's a few people who aren't, you know, who are friends or who knows what, but the point is 9.2, and this is a bit of a tangent, why am I going through all this work? Because 9.2 is high. Some of my favorite games do not have anywhere close to a 9.2. A 9.2 is an unreasonably high rating for a game, and I'm always curious when you see a rating like that, and it should make you pay attention, if nothing else. And secondly, from this game, we'll go through this, well, I'm trying to think the order here. Let's go through the game, the pledge levels, or what the game is itself. Dungeon Universalis is, as the name, you know, says, it's basically a universal dungeon game. It's a game that's meant to not only be its own game, but to literally allow you to be any game you want. And one of the things they broadcast, you want to play Hero Quest with Dungeon Universalis? Go ahead. Pick another dungeon crawler and try to play it with this system? You can. This game lets you build your own system, lets you do your own thing. It is both a defined game that you can play, as well as an open world sandbox that you can experience and go through in all kinds of different ways. And one of the things they link to over here, they link to an extensive description of the game on BGG, and this is by, over here, this is by Thomas M, who's actually a viewer. Hey Thomas, how you doing? And this game over here, he goes through a whole forum post. I'll link to it down below, but it really goes through the various ways you can enjoy the game. This is a good overall breakdown of what the game is, the different ways you can enjoy it, how you can utilize it, what you can do with the game, the single shot games, the campaign modes, how the campaign plays out, and he's very active in the comments as well. So if you scroll down here and you have any comments or questions, anything else, he's pretty active in them. I believe he's a collaborator on the project as well, not actually associated with the creators, but I guess through his love of the game or whatnot. He's collaborating on the project, so he knows about the game. He knows a lot about the game. He has the game. He enjoys the game. He primarily plays it solo, perhaps exclusively solo, I don't actually know. But Dungeon Universalis is, like I said already, or like he said, like the game said, it is an open world giant game with both multiple game modes, from solo, from cooperative, from having a DM, a shadow master or whatnot. It gives you a variety of ways to play, from a single shot to campaign, and the game length is roughly, I think, 60. So it's 1 to 4 hours depending on the number of players. It is a lot going on in this game. This game has your actual heroes, where there are miniatures as an option. You can have resin miniatures as options for your heroes, or you can go through the roughly 800 different creatures with their different stats, which is going to be standee based, because 800 creatures with their different stats is quite a lot. Although they do say, feel free to use whatever miniatures you got from whatever other miniature line. Blacklist Miniatures has their own line, or what's that other famous one? Reaper Bones, or whatever it is, Reaper Minis. Lots of options for getting miniatures if you do want to replace the standees with the miniatures, although to quote the creator, granted, not everyone will have a miniature for a giant wasp. In any case, that is basically what this game is. It is offering a lot, and based on that 9.2, it is supposedly delivering a lot, because keep in mind, this is the second Kickstarter. This is the second print run of a game that has already been delivered. And with that, let's talk about the pledge levels. So, for the pledge levels, to begin with, over here we have €1, which will get you in the door. €10 for if you go for this option, if you want to check out different optional buys and you want to basically build your own pledge. Strictly speaking, you can do it with €1 as well, obviously. For €35, around $42, you get the update pack. This is basically, if you are a first edition backer, you can get the update pack. It comes with a revised rulebook, redesigned map tiles, token standees. In essence, none of these things are essential. All the stuff that, well, can't be printed via PDF is stuff that you don't need replaced. And the rulebook itself is available via PDF, so none of this stuff is essential, but yes, for those who are perfectionists, like myself to a degree, or perhaps like yourself, you probably will want that actual upgrade pack in order to basically get everything together. So that's $42 for the update pack to bring your game to the next, to the current version, iteration. For $80, you get all the expansions over here. This is going to give you €68, $80 is going to give you all the expansions. For $113, this is for, if you have the original game, this will give you all the expansions, as well as it gives you the, the legendary encounters, the campaign and quest book 2, and it gives you the update pack as well. For $141, €119, you get Dungeon Universalis, which is going to give you, well, the core experience, the second edition of the game, the revised edition, as it were. And for $282, €239, you get the Lord of Dun all-in. Now, right now is a good time. This is basically everything, absolutely everything that you want. It gives you, well, everything. And this is a good time to talk about shipping costs, because shipping costs are going to be fairly expensive, unfortunately, and that's what happens when you have 18 kilos or 18 pounds, is one of those two. It looks like over here 12 kilograms, so maybe 18 pounds of, gaming goodness or whatnot. For the USA, you're talking about $44 to $49 for the all-in, and $35 to $39 for the core, and you can check out the table to get those iterations or whatever works for you. If you go to rest of the world, you're looking at €80 for the all-in pledge. That's going to bring you to a grand total of around $400 or so to get everything shipped worldwide. This game is not cheap, both in the game itself as well as in the shipping costs associated, because that's what happens when you give people boatloads of tiles, of cardboards, of tokens, of cards, every single thing you can imagine, all shoved into one box. And that's basically Dungeon Universalis. That's the game, that's the pledge levels. Should you back it, should you not? What's going on over there? So, for the should you back it, it's pretty simple, really, because you can look at the original game. If you look at the original game and you go to the Board Game Geek Marketplace over here, and you click on, well, first of all, you can look at the active listings, but if you click on the price history, and you look through all the sold listings, there are a whole bunch of copies that have sold. Granted, only one used, which, what does that tell you? It could tell you any number of things. Maybe we don't have a lot of copies available for sale, and we have only one copy that was sold used, so that, to me, that makes me wonder how many people are selling this game that they got it for themselves. Meaning people who got this game for themselves don't seem to be selling it, at least not yet. Not a lot of people are getting rid of it. As far as the new copies, yeah, they're all selling. You can click through each one. All of them are selling for more than the respective pledge level that it cost the person. Meaning these are copies where people made money on. They got their money back and then some. If you look at the actual game, like back on Board Game Geek, we have 2 people trading their copy. 2 people trading it. That's not a lot. That's a tiny amount of people who are getting rid of their games. This 9.2 is deserved. This 9.2 means people like the game, and the handful of people that are actually considering getting rid of it or selling it, they are getting their money back and more because other people want this game. Now, as always, second printings are a little bit different. And by the way, they have 2 videos over here you can look through, literally just going through other people's ratings, other people's opinions. They have both content creators as well as individual users who love this game. This game is well loved by many. And then in terms of the should you back it? So yeah, the second edition is a little bit different because it's a second edition. It means people who wanted it in the first time can now jump in now that they're more aware of it, more up to date or whatnot. So second editions are always a little bit less of a guaranteed back because the hype has come and then people just get it on the second edition. At the same time, they're usually still a safe back. Maybe you won't get as much money back, but they're still usually a pretty safe back, all things considered. And lastly, from there, for myself, I personally will not actually be getting this game because for me, it's a combination of a few things, and it's worth covering some of the stretch goals when we talk about this, because, first of all, I'm just not pulled in visually. And visually is a big deal for me, because for me, I often look for every reason not to back a game. I have too many of these giant adventures on my shelf, and I'm always looking for reasons not to back it, and visually, I'm not pulled in. Now, I will mention one of these stretch goals, if I can find the stretch goal table over here, talked about, I'm going to look for that stretch goal table. One of the stretch goals is that they talked about the idea that they are going to be changing or potentially updating the art as per backer requests. I can't find this table over here. There was a table over here full of stretch goals, and on that table they talked about how they're going to be updating the art for the game potentially. I don't know to what extent or what I don't know to what extent they're going to be doing that. So look into that yourself. I tried looking through the updates, tried looking through the comments. I didn't find any concrete information on what will or won't be changing. Past that, the game looks like it's great for RPG players. It looks like it's a combination of a board game and RPG, similar to Gloomhaven is, but much more catered to that RPG element, much more catered to the open worldness of what you do. Gloomhaven kind of gives you the construct of an RPG, but then it really locks you in and it defines it into an actual board game with more strict set mechanics. This, on the other hand, really dives into that RPG aspect, both through the character creation, the fact that there's both apps and tools and everything else to build your own scenarios, to adjust things to whatever you want, to make this game effectively what you want it to be. There is so much going on in this game, and it really does cater very heavily to RPG players, more to the RPG side of board gaming than the board gaming side of board gaming, and I tend to fall more on the board gaming side of board gaming. And lastly, I just have too many games of this nature, so like I said, I'm looking for excuses not to back the game. That is basically Dungeon Universalis, 18 pounds of gaming goodness, set to deliver in June 2021, which seems pretty early on the one hand. On the other hand, it's basically a reprint with some expansion content, which generally means that there's less of a developer cycle, less of a playtesting cycle, less of a reason why this game would take as long as, well, a normal game typically would. Back to as far as I guess, conclusion or whatnot, Dungeon Universalis is an open-world RPG, both giving you defined experiences and sandboxy experiences, giving you whatever you want. It is the game that you will want it to be. It'll be whatever you want. It has a 30-page basic rulebook, as well as a much longer everything going on in this rulebook. It has character classes. You can create your own classes. It is a game that will tell you not to mix together certain things for the construct, but then allow you to mix them together because do what you want to do, and it's a game that will very likely hold its value. If you want to back it, take a look. Until next time, I'm Alex Backer from BoardGameCo. I hope you enjoyed this video, and have a good one.
So hey everyone, this is Thomas, who I reached out to because Thomas is heavily involved with Dungeon Universalis. And Thomas, I already talked about it in the video before, but if you read his Board Game Geek thread, which I linked to, you should check that out. Thomas is heavily involved in the game and is both working as a collaborator on the game as well as been a huge fan of the game. And I wanted to reach out to him specifically to talk about, well, what it is about Dungeon Universalis that, well, makes it so great. Because frankly, and I touched upon this already, it doesn't look like my kind of game as much. The graphics are tuned down, the overall package looks good, but doesn't, compare it to some of these other games I'm interested in, like Madara, like Gloomhaven, like Oathsworn, any of those games. And so I wanted to figure out why Dungeon Universalis is a 9.2. And so Thomas, speaking of which, let's start off with this, which is I believe you were a collaborator not only on Dungeon Universalis, but also on, you mentioned Madara, Oathsworn, any others?
That's it. Madara or Oathsworn Into the Deepwood and done.
Done. Yeah, awesome. And so I guess as a starting point, as a starting reference, what would you say are your top 5 favorite dungeon crawlers?
Top 5 favorite dungeon crawlers would be Madara, Gloomhaven, Kingdom Death Monster, Dungeon Universalis, and Darklight Memento Mori.
Interesting. So I didn't touch upon this in the video, but I saw Dungeon Universalis mention that one of the games they said it's most comparable to is Darklight, which is another game that I actually know the least about from all the ones you've mentioned. Where would you put Dun in that list?
I would put Dun probably fourth on that list, ahead of Darklight, but behind Madara, Gloomhaven, and Kingdom Death Monster.
And do you primarily play Dun solo or as well with other people?
I play almost all my games solo.
Gotcha. And so for Dun, what is it about Dun? Like again, I mentioned already this when I just talked about it a second ago, but I mentioned the idea that it doesn't look as up to polish visually as some other games. And while obviously mechanics above everything, or at least I shouldn't say obviously, for myself, mechanics above everything, at the end of the day, the polish is often what attracts me to something. And so what is it about Dun that pulls you in? Offhand?
What pulls me in is Dawn is basically it's a game, but it's also a toolkit for dungeons, for dungeon crawlers in particular. I would call it a dungeon crawler for fans of dungeon crawlers. It basically, you can play pre-constructed characters, and you can play a campaign with pre-constructed scenarios, or one-shots, or a campaign with overland travel on a map, or you can make up your own content. You can make up your own scenarios. You can even import scenarios in from other games and port them into the Dun system and play them using the Dun tiles. You can even use tiles from other games. You could use minis, standees, characters from other games. They basically incorporate anything that you want to as far as what you own or content that you want to create.
So I was actually curious about that, where I saw the idea and I talked about the idea about porting in things from other games, but like, how does that practically speaking work? Are you just porting over a scenario, a set of rules? Like, if you're trying to say, let's say you're starting off with the first introductory scenario to Gloomhaven, like, what are you doing when you port it in?
You would port over the scenarios, the enemies, the tiles, the top enemies that would spawn. One thing you will see if you play Dun is things aren't in like a predefined position. Like in Gloomhaven, when you go in the second room and you open the door, there's going to be certain enemies on the board in certain spots, and that's always going to be the case when you play that scenario. With Dun, you're going to open the door, and if you're playing with a dark player, the dark player, the opponent in the one versus many scenario, is going to decide when to play cards, when to populate a room, when to play a trap when your character tries to open a door, or when they get too far away from their party. If you're playing with an automated dark player and you're playing solo, you basically have this scenario die that you would roll, which has the symbols for each different type of card from the dark player. So you have trap cards with the gate on it, which would be something like a leg hold trap, or you can even have one where the walls start closing in the room. So you would activate that whenever you opened a door and uncovered a new area or opened a chest. You would roll the scenario die, and if this gate trap symbol comes up, then you would draw the top card from the trap deck and you would resolve that card. If you're opening a door to a new room, you would roll the die, and if you roll and this little symbol with the guy comes up, the enemy, you would draw an enemy card like enemy spotted or wandering monster or special creature, and you would look in the book, do a roll on a table, and then generate whatever enemies were going to appear in that room. So if you're in the middle of a combat, you would roll the die, and if this power symbol comes up, then you would play a card which would enhance the creatures on the opposite side. So it might make the monster quick, where it gets to take 2 turns, it gets an extra move. So
Gotcha.
It would make one of the creatures improve. So basically, you could play the same scenario multiple times, and it would never develop the same way twice.
Yeah, and I saw that. I saw that when they're talking about the replay and the campaign, they said like in addition to the sheer amount of content, even within the own scenario, it's going to be its own story every time. Now, so one of the things
Right.
I did want to ask is because one of the things that has me nervous about it for myself is in terms of accessibility. So I'll mention Machina Arcana, which I believe you're familiar with Machina Arcana, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so Machina Arcana, which is a game I recently just started getting into, I enjoy a lot. One of the things I particularly enjoy about that game is how accessible it is in terms of not necessarily initially, but like in terms of getting it set up, in terms of getting it to the table. It's a pretty accessible game. For Dungeon Universalis, where would you put its accessibility, both in terms of that initial investment in learning rules, getting up to speed, and being able to dive into your first game, as well as once you know all that, getting it to the table?
Um, it's got a fairly heavy rule book. It's 118 pages. It
And
does have a lot of edge cases. They do have a simplified rule book in this Kickstarter, which is 34 pages. So if
okay,
you want a quicker to the table experience, it helps with that. The other thing is from the first campaign, they had a bestiary book. There's bestiary 1, bestiary 2. Each one of the books has 400 different enemies in it that you can generate. So what they did in this campaign, they streamlined it with the bestiary cards and legendary quests add-on. They have 192 pre-configured enemies. They're all enemies required to use in both campaign 1 and campaign 2, and then has all the information that you would need to play that enemy in the game on one card. It's 80 by 120 millimeters, so a little larger than a tarot card. It has the enemy's skills on there, the enemy's weapons on there, all the enemy's stats, so everything you would need to play the enemy. In the past, you had to get the enemy information out of the book, then look up the skills that enemy had with the skill cards and the weapons that the enemy was carrying with the weapon cards, and kind of put all that together. So it helped if you did some prep before the game as the dark player or the
perfect.
automated dark player to put together the packages of the enemies that you were going to generate when you rolled on the chart. So, you would have a package of enemies for 1 result, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You'd have them all ready to go, so you knew what you were going to do when you generated those enemies. They've now simplified that where you just have those cards, and so you can use the cards, and it gets it to the table quicker, helps you during play, so you're not looking up information in the bestiary book. So I would definitely recommend that bestiary card add-on to
To
anybody
condense
that
it.
wanted to
That's
make it easy.
effectively reducing it from, like you said, roughly 800 down to like 200.
Yeah, 192 enemies, and those are all the enemies that are used in campaign 1 and campaign 2. And then they've also gone through the standees and made the standees in the past, in the last Kickstarter. Like, for example, there's a scenario where there were giant spiders and giant ants, giant wasps, different insects, but like there were no standees for the ants. So you had to proxy something or use something else for the ants. They've gone through and all the standees, and so all of those 192 enemies on the bestiary cards, those will be in the 318 standees. So you'll have
Perfect.
all the enemies that you need to play the game for all of campaign 1 and campaign 2.
Perfect. Now, a few more questions and I'll wrap up. I don't want to take too much of everyone's time. But first of all, you mentioned your top 5 dungeon crawlers. Roughly, not no exact number needed, but roughly how many dungeon crawlers do you have?
I have a lot.
A lot. Well, so I figured that's why. Well, because the reason I'm asking the question is because you mentioned your top 5 and then you put done as number 4, and I realized that could be that could sound the wrong way depending on how many dungeon crawlers you have. If you have 40 different dungeon crawlers, then putting done at 4 is pretty big.
I have 900 plus games, and out of those, about 100 of them would be dungeon crawlers. If
Perfect.
a dungeon crawler's been made, I pretty much have it.
Perfect. And the reason it occurred to me to ask, because I know you're familiar with Machina Arcana, and I realized I was like, oh, Machina Arcana wasn't on the list. I wonder what else isn't on that list in terms of other games. Out of curiosity, where do you rank rough numbers? Where do you rank Machina Arcana, Zombicide, Black Plague, Sword and Sorcery?
Uh, those would probably be in the 20 kind of range
That's what Duns for. Yeah,
for
the
me.
reason I picked those,
Yeah.
Machina Arcana because we already talked about it, and Zombicide, Black Plague, and Sword and Sorcery because I know that they are. Well, first of all, I like Zombicide, Black Plague, so I want to drag it into the conversation, and secondly, because those two in general, I know that they're popular titles, and so I want to give. I mean, so is Madara and Gloomhaven, obviously. But yeah, I want to give context to that. Okay, perfect. And then lastly, who would you recommend Dun to, and who would you say it's not for? If you're trying to give a quick summary of Done is for you or Done is not for you.
I would recommend it for fans of dungeon crawlers and fans of games like D&D that they would want to play in a solo mode with, without a DM. Done lets you play games like that in that way. Um, who is not for, the setup for this is comparable to Gloomhaven setup and teardown. It's not,
That's not
you
terrible.
know,
It's time, but it's
yeah,
not
it's
terrible.
not it's not terrible, but it's not like if you want a game that you can set up in 5 minutes, get to the table, play in 30, and be done, it's not going to be that. I mean, it takes more time than that. The scenarios range from 45 to 60 minutes on the short side, to 120 to 150 minutes on the long side. You do play the scenario, you go all the way in and then you come back out. So you have to make it back out the door that you walked in. For example, if you leave somebody behind, you can play a rescue mission where you go the next scenario, you go try to rescue that person to get them back on your squad. I have the game set up here. I can lower it a
Yeah, that'd
little
be great.
bit so you can see this scenario. This is a scenario called Rorg's Lair. It's the second scenario in the campaign. You would come in the main door over on this side and make your way through. This is an example of how this character is opening the door, and you generate the enemies in the room if you draw like an enemy spotted card. And these enemies, one of the things you do is you'd have an initiative roll, um, using your perception against the closest enemy. Whichever team wins the initiative roll, that team will go first. So if you win, the heroes will attack first. If the enemy wins, the enemy monsters will get to go first. The same thing in combat. In combat, you roll 2d6s, for example, and if your value came up higher, then you would win the combat and move forward to damage. If the enemy won the roll, then there would be no damage. You wouldn't move to the damage. In this scenario, you make your way to this door, to the stairwell. If you get all the way to this stairwell over here, then there's actually another 2 rooms where the big bad is, and any enemies that get generated along with the big bad, the leader of this scenario. So you would fight all the way to the stairwell, go into the other 2 rooms, and then make your way back out and out the door over here. There are features you can. Here's some boxes you can search: a dining room table, a fireplace, a bed. The standees, just to show some components, come from small to medium to large to huge.
Whoa.
And you have lots of different features, like, here's a well, a stairwell, a catapult, things like treasure chests, a bridge. You can have bridge over pits and so forth that you can build a bridge. Stairwell, you can have a horse, you can have a mount in the game. And then the tiles, they're all double-sided. There's a wide range of tiles from dungeon environments, sewers, wooden floors, to actually outdoor environments. Like, for example, let me grab these. Here's a outdoor area, a market square, cobblestone.
Those are a little out of the camera.
Oh, okay. A desert area, a cobblestone for a market square, and an outside area. So, for example, there's a bunch of different tiles to represent different environments. There's corridors, smaller corridors, both single and double wide corridors. So it's got quite a bit of content. As far as your, I can get closer to some characters here. As far as your characters go, you have a character sheet with their stats. You have a backpack full of equipment, like healing potions, picks, lock picks. You can have weapons. This is a cat folk, so you have an elven bow, and it also has claws, armor that you equip, and then you can have skills, which you can get when you level up. It also has a very big magic system, so you can, if you play a mage, you can play an actual, pick a school of magic. This is earth magic, and you get to select 4 spells from that, and then you can cast those with your mana pool. So it has a wide range of things that you can do in the game. You actually can play among 15 pre-constructed characters, or you can actually generate your own from different races and classes that are present in the game, and make your own pre-generated character.
Perfect. Thomas, that was excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I guess I'll call it a wrap for this particular one. Thank you everyone for, I guess watching till the end. And if you have any questions, by all means post them either in the Board Game Geek thread that I mentioned, on this video, I guess, although this video is probably not the safest place to make sure they get seen, or in the Kickstarter itself, and Thomas or someone else from Done will be answering most questions, if not all of them. Until next time, everyone, have a good one.